What's going on, everybody? I think the mic's on, and we're going to go through the House floor. It's a little delayed, but it's today. So let's do it together and see what the heck.
Members recognized.
I thank the Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my folks at home, are you concerned about counterterrorism threats? I am too. FISA Section 702 informed the planning for the February 2022 U.S. military operation that resulted in the death in Syria of Haji Abdullah, the leader of ISIS. That's one example. Are you concerned about fentanyl? I am too. We were able to leverage FISA Section 702 intelligence to identify a foreign actor overseas who was supplying pill press machinery and other equipment to drug cartels in Mexico to help thwart that fentanyl threat. Are you concerned about cyber threats? I am too. FISA Section 702 played an important role in the U.S. government's response to the cyber attack on Colonial Pipeline back in 2021 and other cyber threats that have taken place since then. Are you concerned about threats to our troops? I am too. FISA Section 702 has identified threats to U.S. troops and disrupt planned terrorist attacks on those troops overseas in places like the Middle East, a U.S. facility specifically in the Middle East. And 702 was used to monitor communications as those terrorists traveled to go and execute those plans. We can't overstate the importance of 702. And I know you're concerned about the rights of the American people. I am too. I'm an American just like you are. That's why there already is a warrant requirement in place. We are protecting U.S. persons. We can't allow 702 to expire and expect that we're going to have good results at the end of the day. I support Section 702, and I urge a yes vote. Yield back.
Gentleman yields. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair and not to a perceived viewing audience.
I may, the same way. That's
Gentleman from Connecticut is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Hank Johnson.
I thank the ranking member, and I rise in support of reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was first passed by Congress in 2008, which also codified what had been a secret and legally unauthorized practice of warrantless collection of phone, email, and other communications of non-U.S. persons located outside of the United States in response to the deadly 9/11 attack that killed thousands of Americans. As they planned that deadly attack, al-Qaeda plotters used U.S. communications facilities, and American foreign intelligence picked up the chatter.
So I think
but the stovepipe that kept this intel from domestic law enforcement created the situation where domestic law enforcement could not protect us from the threat because they did not know of the plot before it happened. If Section 702 had been in place prior to 9/11, the FBI could have been able to prevent the attack, and allowing Section 702 to expire would expose Americans to grave danger like the horrific massacre of Israeli Jews on October 7th, the military-style assaults like what happened in Russia recently, and other mass casualty events, the limits of which are only.
I want to hear our.
Throughout our process, we regularly engage.
Yeah, I could have
2.5 minutes to the gentleman.
Up at event.
Here we go.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. We've seen a lot since we've been here. This is my third term. Never before have I actually been frightened about what could happen if FISA is not reauthorized or this warrant amendment is passed, which effectively kills our ability to detect and connect the dots between foreign terrorists and what they might do here domestically. I have never been more concerned. I spent the last 20 years of my life fighting for this country, Austin and I doing it. And I don't think we actually disagree very much on principle. There's always a balance between civil liberties, privacy, and security.
Unreal.
I don't think me and my colleagues are very far apart on that. We are very far apart on the facts at hand. And so let's talk about some myths and some facts. Myth: FISA is used to spy on Americans. The myth goes like this: if you query an American's name, you can see their inbox. But it's not true. It is used to spy on foreign intelligence targets, foreign terrorists, and you need a warrant to do so. If they speak to an American, you will get that part of the conversation. That is all you get. Here's another myth. This bill doesn't go far enough. It doesn't do any reforms. That is not true. The reforms in here would stop in their tracks what happened to President Trump with Crossfire Hurricane. It's almost entirely intended to stop what happened to President Trump. Not only that, it would do the necessary reforms it would codify 56 more reforms. It would put in processes before queries are even made. It would put in criminal penalties for those who do not abide by those processes. The FBI hates these reforms, by the way. Please support this bill. Please do not support the amendment to require a warrant for queries. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Connecticut is recognized.
What a bad actor.
Mr. Chair, may I inquire as to the remaining time?
All right, who's next?
Gentleman has 5.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you.
Speed
It's
politics.
Vote on the follow their own darn rules when they search this giant haystack, this giant database of information on Americans.
We'll start with him. We'll get to the beginning of Jimmy Joe.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. In 2021, 2022, the FBI did over 3 million U.S. person queries of this giant 702 database, of this giant haystack of information. 3 million queries of United States persons. And make no mistake, query is a fancy name for search. 3 million Americans' data was searched in this database of information.
People like Dan
Guess
Crenshaw
what?
want to renew this
The FBI
thing.
wasn't even following their own rules when they conducted those searches. That's why we need a warrant. 278,000 times. Not Jim
Checks
Jordan
and
talking about it.
balances. The
Not Ranking
judicial
Member
may
Nadler
bear.
talking about it. Washington Post reported last May that 278,000 times the FBI found, the Justice Department found, that they didn't even follow their own darn rules when they searched this giant haystack, this giant database of information on Americans.
Unreal.
And so what we're saying is, let's do something that the Constitution has had in place for a couple hundred years that has served our nation well and protected American citizens' liberties. Let's make the executive branch go to a separate and equal branch of government, the judicial branch, and get a probable cause warrant to do the search.
Heyo.
After all, it's done pretty well for this great country, greatest country
How's it
ever
going, Diane?
for a long, long time.
Welcome
Why
in.
wouldn't we have that here? And oh, by the way, in a bipartisan fashion, coming out of our committee, 35-2 vote, we said we will even put exceptions in there. If it's an emergency situation, the FBI doesn't have to get a warrant. They can do the search. If it's an emergency situation, they can do it. We put exceptions in there. Here's the fundamental question. I raised this the other day. Here's the fundamental question. Of that over 3 million searches in a 2-year time span, how many of those aren't covered by the exceptions we have in our warrant amendment? What's the number? And guess what? We can't get an answer. They won't tell us, which should be concern in and of itself. But if it's a big number, we should be particularly frightened. If they don't follow the exceptions and they're searching Americans, searching your name, your phone number, your email address
why
in
not
this
tell
giant
us?
database,
If it's a big
that
number,
should
we-
scare us.
you know,
And if
that's
it's a
scary.
small number, then what's the big deal? You don't need thousands. If it's a
Jordan.
small number.
He has.
But
like,
we
high
can't get an
school
answer to
teacher
that question.
vibes. What was his job?
So the
Drop in
underlying
chat,
bill's
you
got
know.
some changes and reforms that are
Prior to
positive,
being
that are good.
congressman.
But short of having this warrant amendment added
knows
to
a
the
lot about
legislation,
judiciary.
we shouldn't pass it. This amendment is critical, particularly when you think about the 278,000 times they abused the system, didn't follow their own rules, and now we say, oh, we got some new rules, they'll follow them now. No, no, no. The real check we have in our system is a separate and equal branch of government signing off on it.
Former collegiate wrestler.
That's how we do
and
things in
wrestling
America.
coach. Totally.
And never forget, this is the FBI who's had some other abuses.
I wasn't sure. If
Different
that's what it
areas.
was.
This is why we think this warrant requirement is so darn important. And with that, I reserve the balance of our time,
Yes.
Mr. Speaker.
Dan
Gentleman
Crenshaw should
reserves.
listen. I wanna
The gentleman
hear
from New
him
York is
respond.
recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may
It's a little bit
consume.
of a comedy,
Gentleman's recognized.
you know?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of
Larry
meaningful
David
reform
vibes.
to FISA Section 702 and in strong opposition to a mere fig leaf, or even worse, an expansion of 702. Unfortunately, we will not know which of these paths we are taking until the conclusion of this debate. What I know at this moment is that the base text before us right now is completely inadequate. Although it has some perfectly fine provisions, it does not represent real reform. Some of the proposed amendments that will be coming up today would take us in the wrong direction.
It's hard to hate neighbors.
And changing the sunset from 5 years to 2 years does absolutely nothing to improve the bill. Ultimately, this legislation should only move forward if it contains an amendment to mandate that the intelligence community obtain a probable cause warrant before they search the 702 database for Americans' private communications. Some of my colleagues appear confused about how 702 collection works and what we mean when supporters of a warrant requirement refer to backdoor searches for U.S. personal information. So let's be clear about what we're talking about. FISA Section 702 permits the intelligence community to sweep up the communication of foreign targets located overseas. When these communications are obtained, they go into what is known as the 702 database, where all the 702 data is housed. If the U.S. government wants to target a U.S. person for foreign surveillance, U.S. person meaning an American or a legal permanent resident, they already can. They do this by getting a warrant under Title I of FISA, a separate and distinct part of FISA from Section 702. The government cannot target Americans under 702 because 702 does not protect the constitutional rights of the targets of the surveillance. Foreigners not located on U.S. soil do not have constitutional rights, so this is not a problem. What is a problem, however, is that massive amounts of Americans' communications are still swept up in 702 searches. If a U.S. person communicates with a foreign target, that American's communications with the target end up in the 702 database, too. While we do not know precise numbers, we know that a vast amount of Americans' communications is swept up every year. The intelligence community is not supposed to search the 702 database for U.S. person identifiers, like our names, phone numbers, and addresses, without cause. Searching for Americans' private communications in the 702 database, communications the government otherwise would not have access to without a warrant, is the constitutional equivalent of conducting a warrantless search. But we know that the government breaks this law all the time. 278,000 times, in fact, at last count in 2021 alone. Officials are supposed to find it reasonably likely that a query will turn up evidence of a crime or foreign intelligence information. But that did not stop them from searching for protesters, politicians, and political donors, to name a few, without proper predicate. Because of these repeated violations, Chairman Jordan and I agree that the only way to preserve Americans' privacy and constitutional rights is to require the intelligence community to obtain a probable cause warrant when they want to search the communications of Americans housed in the 702 database. This is a basic tenet of the Fourth Amendment. Now, Chairman Turner stated incorrectly that the proposed warrant requirement gives constitutional rights to suspected terrorists abroad. Nonsense. The warrant requirement does not change any aspect of surveillance of valid targets under Section 702, nor should it. The problem is that when we surveil the Internet, we sweep up massive amounts of U.S. person information. And the warrant requirement we propose would apply the Fourth Amendment to that information, nothing more, and our Constitution demands nothing less. We have repeatedly heard some of our colleagues tell us that the sky is falling, that a probable cause requirement would end U.S. person searches of the 702 database. But there are no facts to back up these claims. We will be considering an amendment today to add a warrant requirement for U.S. person searches of the 702 database. This essential amendment makes exceptions for victim consent, cybersecurity cases, and exigency, that is, emergencies. Thus, the vast majority of these searches can continue without a warrant. But for the small percentage of searches of American communications that would be affected, the government should have probable cause to search their communications. Yes. It is simply unfair to ask the intelligence community to both zealously protect our security while also protecting the constitutional rights of those surveilled. American system of checks and balances exists precisely for cases such as this, where two considerations must coexist at odds with one another. For too long, FISA Section 702 has enabled the surveillance of Americans without adequate safeguards to protect our civil liberties. Americans need Congress to enact these guardrails. And with Section 702 expiring soon, we have a rare opportunity to protect Americans' privacy while giving enforcement the tools they need to keep us safe. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on this legislation unless a probable cause warrant is adopted. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my friend and a member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't discount the mounting dangers we face from enemies abroad. But we also cannot discount the dangers we face at home from the very powers that this bill would continue. As has been pointed out, the FBI abused these powers 278,000 times in a single year and turned them against American citizens, fishing for January 6th and Black Lives Matter rioters, probing political donors, and even piercing congressional offices. John Adams believed that the indiscriminate searches by British officials became the first spark of the American Revolution. Having lived under such a tyranny, the founders protected us with the Fourth Amendment. Before authorities can search through our records, they have to get a warrant from an independent judge by showing probable cause to suspect that we've committed a crime. Now, there are many excellent reforms in this bill, and I applaud them. But they largely depend on these agencies policing themselves, and experience warns us that's just not enough. Without a warrant requirement, I fear these powers will once again be turned against our fundamental liberties. And these days, that scares me as much as a terrorist attack. Just imagine how much safer we'd all be if we stationed a soldier in every house. But we have a Third Amendment to protect us against that tyranny, just as we have a Fourth Amendment to protect us against the tyranny of indiscriminate searches. Benjamin Franklin's warning echoes through his age to ours today. Those who can give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
In the chat.
Let that not be history's judgment of us. I yield back.
Gentleman yields.
All right, who's next?
Reserve.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a critical opportunity today to stand up for the civil liberties that are enshrined in our Constitution while also safeguarding our national security. Every single day, the FBI conducts an average of 500 warrantless searches of Americans' private communications, resulting in over 278,000 searches in 1 year alone. The FBI has invaded the privacy of members of Congress, a state court judge who reported civil rights violations by a local police chief, Black Lives Matter protesters, and more. We cannot pass this bill without additional protections like my amendment with Representative Biggs and Nadler and Jordan and Lofgren and Davidson to close the backdoor search loophole. And unfortunately, there are some members of the intelligence community, some members of this body that are circulating information that simply isn't correct. And I need to correct the record right here. Some members have implied that the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board does not support the amendment. To counter that, let me share some quotes from Sharon Bradford Franklin in her personal capacity as chair of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, the independent government agency tasked with ensuring the executive branch conducts national security work in a way that protects our civil liberties and our privacy. Here are her quotes. It is critical that in reauthorizing Section 702, Congress include a warrant requirement for U.S. person queries. Another quote, requiring a warrant for U.S. person queries would neither end U.S. person queries nor undermine the overall value of Section 702. Another quote, outside of the category of, quote, victim queries, the FBI has not been able to identify any cases in which a Section 702 U.S. person query provided unique value in advancing a criminal investigation. In addition, the government has been unable to identify a single criminal prosecution that relied on evidence identified through a U.S. person query. Another quote, the warrant requirement contained in the warrant amendment includes important exceptions that would address the government's concerns about slowing down the process for U.S. person queries. Exceptions are provided for exigent circumstances, consent, cybersecurity, and metadata-only queries. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear that the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, in its oversight capacity, has the same access to all the classified intelligence that the agencies cite when they try to scare us into reauthorizing FISA with minimal changes. We have a bipartisan amendment that would fix this problem. We have a responsibility to stand up for civil liberties of our constituents. We cannot pass this bill without requiring intelligence agencies to ensure that Americans' privacy rights are upheld at every turn. I yield back.
Lady yields.
Working on these things.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before yielding to my good friend, I just want to underscore what the gentlelady from Washington just described. The Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, created by the 9/11 Commission Act of 2007, says that our amendment is consistent with what should happen. Our amendment is consistent with the majority recommendation of that board. This was a board specifically created to protect Americans' liberties, looking at how the intelligence community operates by the 9/11 Commission Act of 2007. And they say this amendment, the majority of that board said this amendment is what needs to happen. With that, I yield to my good friend from New Jersey, member of our committee, for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, you just heard the words of Benjamin Franklin from my good friend Tom McClintock. Those who would give up freedom for safety deserve neither. I hope that we aren't marked in history as the generation of Congress that was willing to give up American liberty and freedom. It is what we stood for. It is what we've worked for. It is what the men and women of this country have died for. We owe it to them. It is our most important right as Americans. It is what America is, the United States of America represents. And we were told all this before. We were told in the last renewal of 702, everything was going to be okay. No worries. All the security was there. Nothing to be concerned about. Don't look here. And then we saw what happened. We saw that political campaigns and donors, they were gone after. We saw that members of Congress were investigated. We saw that journalists were investigated. We saw that individuals who were libertarians or liberals or conservatives were investigated.
Everybody has been investigated.
We saw FBI agents' own co-workers were investigated, and they investigated their ex-girlfriends and others, and just the average man in America, the average man and a woman was investigated. It was wrong. Millions of times, not dozens, not hundreds, not thousands, but over that time period, millions of times. Millions of illegal queries. I cannot support, I will not support this legislation unless there is a major change in the form of an amendment that would require what we know needs to be done, a search warrant. It's a basic American right. And don't let them scare you. It doesn't mean that we're not going to go after terrorists. It doesn't mean we won't protect the United States of America. And when I finally wrap up here, if this bill is so good the way it's written, why? Why do we exempt members of Congress? You know why? Because they're scared that they may still, at the end of the day, go after us. It's wrong. Rules for thee and not for me. We should not stand for it. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Hit that subscribe button.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 4 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Crime Subcommittee, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Let me thank the distinguished ranking member of the Judiciary Committee and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Even in this time of 2024, we need this legislation to protect now one of the most revered civil rights leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King. Yes, we need legislation that would, in fact, protect someone who simply wanted to provide justice to this nation. And he was the subject of COINTELPRO, a horridly distorted investigation of his family, of his belongings, of his extended family members, of his wife, who I think at the time was expecting. This legislation is important to save lives. It is important legislation to ensure that our intelligence community, our law enforcement community can do their job. but it is not
Because
legislation
a lot
that
of
should be
people think
utilized
that
to
the
abuse the
CIA
American
may have
people.
had their
So I
something
rise
to do
today
with
to
killing
speak
Dr. King.
of the
Or was it
concerns on
CIA
H.R.
one of the
7888.
shady
It is a
organizations?
bipartisan bill to reauthorize an essential intelligence authority, Section 702 of the Foreign
It makes-
Intelligence
her
Surveillance
argument
Act,
makes no
FISA,
sense. She's like,
and
Dr.
other
Martin Luther
FISA
King would've
provisions
wanted
before they
this.
would expire on April 19. But in doing
what a
so,
bunch of
we find ourselves being
nonsense.
subject to the eye of the knife, if you will, in
She invokes Dr. King,
penetrating
Pelosi's
the
gonna
personal
invoke
matters
9/11.
of individuals that have no desire to do harm to this country. As we know all too well, expiration of 702 authorities would deprive our federal government of the necessary insight into precisely the threats Americans expect their
This is
government
a
to
big deal.
identify and counter. We understand that, as highlighted and emphasized through federal administration. If we lost 702, we lose vital protections to the United States and its allies from hostile foreign adversaries, including terrorists, proliferators, and spies, and to inform cybersecurity efforts. But we're also acutely aware that 702 is an extremely controversial, warrantless surveillance authority that must not be reauthorized without substantial reform to rein in warrantless surveillance of Americans. We simply cannot do that. Indeed, warrantless surveillance intended for American, non-American targets located abroad inevitably has resulted in the collection and capture of Americans' communications. And yes, the results of capturing information that safeguards the American people and provides us with a safety net that we can fight for justice, fight for civil rights, and yet be protected. It is no secret that intelligence agencies have turned Section 702 into a domestic spying tool used to perform hundreds of thousands of warrantless backdoor searches for Americans' private phone calls, emails, and text messages. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, we have got, Mr. Chair, we've got a whole new world of technology where you can probe every aspect of our life. Yes, these searches have included shocking abuses, including against civil rights leaders, protesters, members of Congress, 19,000 donors to congressional campaigns, political parties. To protect the American people, we need to maintain the vital collection authority as intended to protect our nation and national security. We must do that while at the same time strengthening its protective guardrails with the most robust set, if you will, of protection that we possibly can. That's why I've joined with several members, including Mr. Klein, to offer the Abouts Amendment, and we will offer that as one of the Judiciary 3. This amendment does something Congress should have done 7 years ago, prohibit the government from resuming Abouts collection, a form of Section 702 that poses...
So skip forward here.
America.
Ugh. Come on, let's get somebody who puts the butts in the chairs. If you see someone you want me to stop and watch, let me know. But I'm looking for, oh no, stream down, guys. I think they wrapped. No, here we go.
For what purpose does the
now in order?
They can do it right.
Government. It is clear that we should have a warrant. Activate reserve the hood.
If you just read the front page of it, clearly says that it is about the intelligence that's gathered from foreigners abroad. This is not about Americans' data. America's data are safe.
No, it's not.
Constitutionally protected. They're inbox and outbox. No amendment on this floor can change the Constitution. No statute on this floor can change the Constitution. The statute that we're talking about is 702, which is the spying on foreigners abroad. Now, everybody in this House is pissed at the FBI and is pissed about the abuses that have occurred. Punish the FBI. Pass this underlying bill. Do not pass the Biggs Amendment and cause us to go blind and make America less safe. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Pretty much the entirety of the debate that has been had down here has been focused on the warrant requirement, right? The reason that we've got this particular amendment here before us right now is simply to just be able to have more reporting and more understanding of what's happening in the FISC. But there is always constant resistance by the intelligence community to looking under the hood, because it is always the case that they want to use the fear. Perhaps it is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged against danger, real or pretended. from abroad.
To my point, I don't know.
James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, May 13, 1798.
You know, when you
the fact is, the founders knew precisely what would
Canadian
occur.
politics, and they're doing these
that the
floor
government, in the
debates,
quest
and they're talking, and
to
there's a bunch
have
of people
power
behind
in the name of stopping foreign
happen.
adversaries,
I know
and in the
there's
name
probably
of
rules against
fear, would use that power against our own citizens. That's what's occurring.
But everybody
That's
in the
what's
background,
happening.
just like
and we have before us real and obvious
it's
abuses.
Terrible.
278,000 of those abuses going after the American people. And our response is a bunch of technical stuff that chases the actual core problem. Our friends don't want to get into peeling back the hood of what's happening in the intel community because our friends are the intel community. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
In conclusion, as we look at this debate and this bill, which is about spying on foreigners abroad, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Chinese Communist Party, giving them constitutional protections is unprecedented. There's no court that has ever done it. There's been no bill that has passed this House that gives constitutional protections to foreigners abroad. Americans' constitutional rights are preserved in the Constitution. This amendment undermines our security by giving Americans constitutional rights here in the United States to foreign adversaries. Vote no on the Biggs Amendment. Vote no on this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
To be clear, this amendment is about reporting requirements. But on the point of the warrant, after the rampant abuses by the federal government, it is clear that we should have a warrant requirement under 702 to protect Americans from the querying of incidental communication collected en masse under a broad grant of power to target foreign entities. That's the truth. This is the FBI that targeted Catholics, put pro-life progressive activists in jail, and targeted President Trump. The proponents give up the game, saying openly the need to target U.S. persons right here on the floor. The only thing that makes this warrantless collection of millions of Americans' international communications lawful, quote unquote, is the government's certification that it is targeting foreigners and only foreigners. If the government changes its mind and wants to go after an American, it should have to go back and get the warrant that it skipped on the front end. This is not that hard. By the way, the argument that we would need 2,000 judges to filter through warrant requirements begs the question, which is it?
At the judge's house.
The proponents' own data indicate they will only get a hit for 1% to 2% via metadata. Some of those will have exceptions under our warrant amendment that we offer, so it'd probably be less than 1%.
FBI has a little
so the 2,000 judges argument is just straight up false.
On foreign
it's just not that hard. If you want to go after an American, if you want to look at their information, get a warrant. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye.
From Scotland and Australia.
Those opposed
this
say
is about
no.
spying on you, really. But
in opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I ask for recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed.
What do we got?
Support, and I
to an
in order to
in there is counter narcotics, the thing that's actually killing Americans.
But you can just basically
pursuant to House Resolution 1137, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
I need to have something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Something ready, like
I want to let my fellow Americans know something that might shock them. We all know that fentanyl is a scourge on our country. We all know that fentanyl is produced by the Mexican drug cartels. We all know that the precursor chemicals for fentanyl come from Chinese companies. What you might not know is that we can't even get a FISA warrant to stop that, to collect intelligence on those production companies, on those attorneys, on those bankers, on those facilitators that help the cartels murder and poison tens of thousands of Americans every single year.
How's that?
That's a pretty shocking statement. I bet you didn't know that. Well, you should know that. You know, FISA, despite all of the misinformation put out about it, is actually very narrowly tailored. It only allows you to get a warrant on a foreigner in a foreign land if it's related to foreign intelligence, if it's related to counter weapons of mass destruction, or if it's related to counterterrorism. Nowhere in there is counter narcotics, the thing that's actually killing Americans today and every single day. FBI. My amendment would simply upgrade that categorization to ensure that we can collect intelligence on the Chinese precursor being shipped into Mexico and into our own country so that we can actually stop the death of Americans.
Yes.
It's a very narrowly tailored amendment. It's not about all drug traffickers. It does not swoop in a bunch of Americans. It is about international drug traffickers trafficking illicit synthetics that are killing people. It's a very simple amendment. It's a bipartisan amendment. It is one of the biggest things that I've learned as my role as chairman on the cartel task force, that we actually are blind to the supply chains of fentanyl. To be against this amendment is to say we should give the cartels and China more Fourth Amendment rights and more First Amendment rights than we have. That's what it would mean in practice. And I hope that anyone who votes against this amendment, I hope you stop talking about the cartels being a problem. Because if we're not even allowed to collect intelligence on the cartels,
you should.
Then what are we doing?
I don't know.
What are we doing?
From what I understand is you're not doing much
on the cartel front. At this point, I would like to yield 2 minutes to my friend, Representative Houlihan.
Military. I don't know.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
But it was either Senator.
Thank you, Representative Crenshaw, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I also rise in support of this important amendment that will help our intelligence community strengthen our southern border and will save American lives. This amendment will fully enlist our country's intelligence agencies in the fight against foreign drug traffickers. Foreign-made fentanyl is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year, and so it is, of course, critical that we start treating this danger as the very serious national threat that it is.
Feel like people get
so my legislation, which is called the Enhancing Intelligence Collection on Foreign Drug Traffickers Act, is now the bipartisan amendment that is led by myself and Mr. Crenshaw, and this would allow our intelligence community to counter drug cartels.
Not interested in. Here we go. I want to hear Crenshaw. I want to hear him and his jumping through hoops.
So I urge my colleagues to pass this legislation, to pass the counter narcotics amendment led by myself and Mr. Crenshaw, and to reject any amendment that would put our national security at risk. Thank you, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
I just want to say to those opposed to the underlying bill, I understand. We're going to have to agree to disagree. But I cannot imagine being opposed to this amendment, even if you vote against the overall bill. I thought we all agreed that the cartels are one of our #1 threats. They're killing tens of thousands of Americans every year by poisoning them with fentanyl. We need to know how they're doing it. We need to know who their suppliers are. We need to know who's laundering their money.
We need to work with the Mexican
We can't know that within our current law. All we have to do is allow ourselves to do it. This is one of the most important things that I think our constituents actually care about. If we're going to act like we have sympathy for sons and daughters who have been killed from an overdose of fentanyl, then we actually have to take action on it. I got to say, too, that the Warrant amendment would kill our ability to do this. Remember, the whole point of drug trafficking is to get it in the United States, y'all. The whole point of terrorism is to conduct a terrorist attack here in the United States. When you're collecting intelligence on foreigners, the only way they do those things is to communicate with entities inside the United States.
Inside that little box I gave you.
To demand a secondary warrant just to search that communication kills our ability to connect those dots. And I yield back.
Mr. Speaker. I seek recognition.
I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The Crenshaw Amendment would expand FISA's definition of foreign intelligence to encompass international drug crimes. FISA is a counterintelligence and counterterrorism tool. Its limitation to that purpose and the clear distinction between foreign intelligence and crime are essential to preserving fundamental liberties of Americans under our constitutional system. Destroy.
Should we go back and listen? I don't know.
illegally our southern border. This is what I think a lot of Americans probably don't realize.
This guy's good.
Currently, Section 702.
He's from Florida, I believe, and he's like a former. Let's get to the beginning.
It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 5, printed in House Report 118-456. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in House Report number 118-456, offered by Mr. Waltz of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1137, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself such times I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Yes. All right. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of my amendment to permit the use of 702 information to vet foreign nationals entering the United States. This amendment enables the thorough vetting of all foreigners being processed for travel into the United States, whether that's a foreign national applying for a visa, applying for legal immigration, or crossing illegally our southern border. This is what I think a lot of Americans probably don't realize.
I see what you're doing,
Currently, Section 702 has only been authorized to collect information to support some Department of Homeland Security efforts to screen and vet foreign persons applying for travel or immigration to the United States. This amendment will enhance the vetting of all foreigners who come here. If national security concerns are found through this vetting, these results will be provided to the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, and the Department of Defense to ensure the federal government is making the most informed decision before we allow foreign nationals admission. Mr. Speaker, we are 3 years into the worst crisis at the southern border in the history of the United States. And last year, Customs and Border Protection recorded 2.5 million encounters with people attempting to cross the United States.
As I was hoping.
I rise to claim opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Now they want to expand it. This is the second amendment in a row where they're going to expand FISA. Can't have a warrant for the existing program.
And that's my
no,
issue with
this
Waltz's
giant haystack
amendment.
of information can't have a warrant when you go search
what he was
American
trying to
citizens
do,
there.
but-
But now they want to expand it and tell us you still can't have a warrant. Holy cow. Pretty soon this is going to be everybody gets to get searched for any darn reason they want. That's not how it works in America, at least not how it's supposed to work. The Third Amendment is going to expand it too.
There's so many lawyers in the House, but it's the wrestling coach.
We spent all morning talking about the warrant requirement, which should be so obvious, and they want to expand it. Now, look, I understand we got a border problem.
They saw
Holy
this
cow,
coming
do
from
we
a mile
understand
away.
that?
This
And I
kind
may
of
not agree with my
behavior,
Democrat
these
colleagues on how to
overreaches.
fix it. In fact, I know I don't. But this, expanding FISA, I mean, you've got to be kidding me. This amendment authorizes surveillance of a whole new category of individuals. We should absolutely vet foreigners who seek to enter the United States, whether legally or illegally, but Congress should not expand FISA or Section 702 beyond its current scope of authorities. I mean, this whole year we've been focused on our committee on limiting FISA, reining it in so that we still can do what we need to be done, look after bad guys, look at bad guys, but not infringe on Americans' liberties, and this just expands it. That's not what the purpose of this bill is. We should address the border problem. Holy cow, our committee spent a boatload of time on it, and that's an issue where unfortunately we didn't get a 35-2 vote on H.R. 2, which is a good piece of legislation. But this is going to sweep up so many more Americans where the FBI 278,000 times, not illegally, but didn't follow their own rules when they queried the database.
That's not my team.
But now they got even more. Holy cow, this is the wrong way to go.
And that's,
with that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from
I'm
Washington.
not a big fan of Crenshaw.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. And yes, I agree with Chairman Jordan on an immigration amendment because this is an expansion of the government's ability to surveil. And we have this opportunity right here in Congress today to add critical safeguards, not expand the government's use of this surveillance authority. This inexcusable expansion of FISA will further increase warrantless surveillance, and it is at the expense of a whole slew of innocent immigrants. People seeking to come to this country are not monolithic communities cut off from Americans. Many of them are close family members of U.S. citizens seeking reunification through family sponsorship or just a simple visit. Many others are sponsored by U.S. employers. There is already ample vetting of immigrants. Just look at refugees who are the most vetted group of people who come to this country. It takes years of vetting through multiple agencies, including the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center, and other agencies. This amendment is only going to make visa processing backlogs worse. It will further delay American businesses from getting the workers we need to maintain our competitiveness and our ability to attract the best and the brightest. And it could harm local economies that rely on tourism as delays in processing travel visas deter people from choosing to travel to America. We should not be expanding FISA. We should be creating safeguards to protect foundational civil liberties rights. Now, earlier, one of my colleagues claimed that not a single federal court has identified a Fourth Amendment issue with U.S. person queries. Mr. Chairman, that is false. That is false. In 2019, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit found Fourth Amendment concerns with U.S. person queries, and that issue is still being debated. We are talking about an average of 500 warrantless searches of Americans' private communications every single day. And don't take it from me. Here's a quote from Travis LeBlanc, a Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board member. Here's the quote. Although Section 702 is touted as a foreign intelligence tool.
General, you're recognized for additional 30 seconds.
Although Section 702 is touted as a foreign intelligence tool, it is apparent that a key feature is domestic intelligence and criminal law enforcement. For example, DOJ reported that the FBI has queried over 19,000 donors to a congressional campaign. The FBI has also run numerous improper queries of social advocates, religious community leaders, and even individuals who provide tips or who are victims of crime. 5 million warrantless searches by the FBI of Americans' private communications is 5 million too many.
And
vote no on this amendment.
Willing to turn
General's
over.
time has
It was
expired.
probably anybody
from
who
Ohio.
liked a Trump tweet.
I would just close our time by saying, Mr. Chair, every time you expand FISA, you underscore the need for a warrant. The bigger and bigger this database gets, the more U.S. persons are going to be searched. You underscore the need for a warrant, which we've spent the whole morning debating. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chair, how much
do you think he's
time do I have remaining?
Christoph Waltz? They have
Gentleman has
some
1 minute
similar
remaining.
Features.
Mr.
Very
Chair, I
large heads.
find it astounding the leader of the Progressive Caucus, Ms. Jayapal, and Mr. Jordan agree on these issues, but
it's not
I yield my time to Mr. Turner from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've had members stand and say that they're for vetting foreigners who want to come into the United States.
Both sides of the argument. Really.
I assume we should vet them for whether or not they have ties to terrorist groups and organizations.
How is it going to be used? You know?
Perhaps we should just ask them, because I'm sure they'll tell us the truth. But they won't, which is why we have 702. 702 collects foreigners abroad, terrorist groups and organizations. What this amendment does is it allows us to search Hamas on these individuals who want to come in to the United States to find out if they're affiliated with Hamas, because they're not just going to tell us. If you're for vetting, you're for vetting, looking at terrorist groups and organizations to see if they have ties to people who are trying to come into the United States. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
That's
This
such an
gentlelady from
anemic
Washington
vote.
seek recognition.
Where are our legislators?
Does the gentlelady ask for a recorded vote?
What is going on here?
Excuse me, I do.
Is this
pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18 for the proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed.
All right.
There you go.
What's
amendment is. That's why we should defeat this amendment. Now, I've enjoyed it, all the attention, the Biggs, Jayapal,
I know, that was terrible.
Jordan, Nadler, Davidson, Lofgren amendment has received. It's been flattering that on every other amendment and the underlying bill, we don't talk about any of that other stuff. We talk about warrant. And that gets to the reality of the situation. The intelligence community wants control. They want to continue to have control without any checks. The Biggs Amendment does not require a warrant for the government to surveil foreigners in foreign countries or to incidentally collect the communication of Americans under Section 702. Let me repeat that to you. The amendment does not require a warrant for the government to surveil foreigners in foreign countries, nor does it require a warrant for incidentally collected the communications of Americans under Section 702. It just doesn't. But that's what you've heard. Instead, it requires that the federal government and the spying surveillance apparatus get a warrant if they want to read an American's communications or query them in the 702 database.
Is a congressman.
That's
is it one of the guys
the essence of this is. They don't want to have to get
Fringe?
a warrant. They're okay with getting a warrant under Title I of FISA,
Chad, do you remember that?
but not under 702 for some reason.
What are they called?
Odd. Very odd. And I'll tell you what else. Not only do they not want to get a warrant, they want to expand the database and the scope of the Americans that they can scoop up in that database to include, in this particular amendment, virtually every retail outlet in the country, virtually every commercial enterprise in the country, virtually every commercial property in this country. But by golly, we don't want to have a warrant if we're going to look into U.S. persons' information. Don't want to do that. After all, that might cause them to actually develop and investigate further. Let me tell you something. This underlying bill loses its quality if you don't pass the Biggs Amendment on the Warren Amendment. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
No, I did.
And then we have some voting. Biggs Amendment, Biggs of Arizona. Nays. Ooh, it's getting close. Wow, what was that? What does it mean? Hold on. And we're back. All right. The vote is tied. 212 to 212. That was the Biggs Amendment tied, and I'm not sure what
the clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 118-456, offered by Mr. Crenshaw of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Jake Elzy. Okay, stream.
56, offered by Mr. Waltz of Florida.
And these are, wait, did that, oh my God, Crenshaw's. Looks like, did the underlying vote happen? Is this on the passage of the entire?
Those opposed, no?
No!
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is adopted.
Oh, please.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek
I
recognition?
ask for a recorded vote, Mr. Speaker.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed.
This channel is biased in favor of Representative Anna Paulina Luna.
Unanimous competition that allows high school students to demonstrate their skills in a variety of competitions. Students had the opportunity to compete both individually and as a team. Keystone Central had 25 students participate in the event. The students represented different programs, including child care, drafting design, health assisting, and precision machining. 12 students won awards, with 4 coming in first place for community service and related technical
I'm not sure if the Senate took it up yet.
1 coming in second for CTE demonstration, and 7 coming in third for architectural drafting, career pathways, industrial and engineering technology, and career pathways for human services. The student who came in first will advance to the national competition in Atlanta, Georgia in June.
It's crazy.
I'm proud of
We're
these
living in
Keystone
a
Central
very,
students for their hard work
dystopian
and dedication
future
to
here,
learning.
dark
I wish
timeline.
them the best of luck in their
What do you
future
think,
career
Chad?
paths. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield
When
back
do you think
the
we
balance
got
of my
on this
time.
dark timeline?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I see unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today because this week the Biden administration took yet another massive step in the fight to end gun violence and save innocent lives. Yesterday, the administration took historic action to reduce the number of firearms
in the country.
Putin, Ukraine is rationing.
So.
And Dr. Valerie O'Regan.
Okay. We'll leave it on a good one.
500 new businesses across South.
I don't know who Reverend Dr. Cecil Chip is, but okay. So I'm naive because I thought that maybe they'd step up and block the passage of FISA, or expansion. I don't know what I was hoping for. I was hoping for the pendulum to start swinging in the other direction, away from dystopian future, but we're not going to get that today, unfortunately. So with that, I'll say, sayonara. Don't forget, knowledge is power. Subscribe for more. I'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody, for joining me.